Dr. Mary Keller is the first full-time UW faculty member who not only teaches via distance full-time, but also lives full-time at a distance. She does her teaching and her research from Cody, from where she also undertakes her departmental responsibilities and her university duties as a full member of the Religious Studies Department. Dr. Keller is an expert on indigenous religions and in particular on spirit possession. She teaches everything from Introduction to Religion, which is 6 religions in 12 weeks, to a variety of African religions, Afro-Caribbean religions, and religions in America. Her first book, The Hammer and the Flute, Women in Power and Spirit Possession, won the American Academy of Religion's Best First Book Award when it appeared. She's continued to research in both areas, writing Indigenous Religion from the Origins to the Future of Religious Studies. That was a really fun article. And another interesting article, Sacred and Indigenous Studies, which was published in American Indian Quarterly. She has twice been the guest editor for the academic journal Culture and Religion, first for an issue on spirit possession, right there in the middle of her specialty, but more recently for an issue on hip-hop and religion. However, my favorite essay of Mary's appeared in the journal Qualitative Research in Financial Markets, and it was entitled Tele-Investment Evangelists, Celebrity, Ritual, and Religion and the Quest to Beat the Market. Dr. Keller grew up in Cody, went east to get her bachelor's degree in Williams College in Massachusetts, and then her PhD in religion from Syracuse University. After that, she taught in the religion department at the University of Stirling in Scotland for a number of years before coming to UW. Today, she's going to take us out of our comfort zone in Christianity and teach us about finding religion in a globalized world. Professor Keller.
I always start my world religions course letting the students know this is mission impossible. How are you going to do world religions at 2 weeks at a time, right? So tonight will be mission impossible. I'm going to try to give you 5 minutes on the problems that the study of religion raises at a university or in civic spaces. 5 minutes on a solution. And that solution is if you develop a locative theory of religion, that is the idea that one thing that religions comparatively do is give people a deep sense of where they stand in relation to that which is of most importance to them, then you can now start having a civic discussion that's pretty interesting, and it's good for students. We'll go 5 minutes on Grant Bulltail from Crow Agency, Montana. I've been working with him for the last 10 years. And his description of Akbahi Lashe as the ultimate source of power, the thing that orients his cosmology. And we'll do 5 minutes on VODOUN from Benin, Africa, where our scholar in that case is defining religion as nature and nature as religion. So right, our problem is finding religion. So let's go. Now this is mission impossible. You can tell the way I'm talking. It'll be more. Anyway, but first let's clear the air then. So is it crazy to talk about religion in an educational setting? It's not something we do in our like in our K through 12, right? We don't implicate a whole lot of religion in there. In the UK, from K through 12 the whole time, you're getting kind of a comparative study of religion through it. But it gets a little dicey in the American setting. So let me try for a moment of humor. I think of this as a scholar of religions, that when students head into a physics class, they are unlikely to say, oh, I wonder if my professor's physical. And if they head into a biology class, they're unlikely to say, I wonder if my professor's biological. Or maybe into one of Mr. Allen's classes and say, oh, I wonder if he's mathematical. But when you walk into a religious studies class, there's this kind of sense of, oh, I wonder if she's religious. right? There's something about the study of religion that seems like being religious and studying religion seem intertwined. And for many students who arrive being religious, they're wondering what's it going to be like to study religion. And they might even have family that thinks it's not a good idea. So it's a real interest. We're an odd, I can tell you, I got faculty members at UW who don't really know what to do with us. What are you doing? Doing religion and woo stuff. We're a university. So another moment of humor, if I were teaching Civilization of China classes, nobody walking in the room would really be wondering, is she Chinese? Or is she gonna want me to become Chinese? Right? You know how to study another culture. You can go in and study and you walk away. So again, there's something about religious studies that makes it the elephant in the university. So yes, we can, and not only that, but we should, right? Given that the 21st century, in many ways, especially for the American psyche, starts with 9/11. Then the point is we certainly do. If a university is a place where you are teaching people to be global citizens and to develop critical thinking, you better believe. In fact, I'd like to say that religious studies is one of the best majors or minors you could have these days. Because if you can't make sense of the role that religion is playing in our world, you're going to have a lot of trouble making meaning. So, study of religions at UW develops skills for cultural translation, and those are adequate for work, society, but even most importantly, it's for making meaning in a globalized world. So any kid who comes into one of my classes, what I'm hoping is 10 years from now, they're making meaning out of the world that they're in. And that's one of the things religious studies can be good at. All right, so is religion, said we're finding religion, is it everywhere or is it nowhere? Do you know religion when you see it? I want you to just sit with that question for a minute. Do you know religion when you see it? There's a good chance that many of you did. So what in the heck am I going to tell you? Like maybe doing mathematics is something that you need a professor for, but you guys have been recognizing religion forever. There's a really good chance that we got all kinds of information, experience, and expertise out there. What have I got to tell you? Well, every room for me is a room where I can kind of check the pulse of how the word religion is playing in that society. And so I'm going to do a quick little survey here and see if you guys will participate with me. So would you all say that religion is everywhere? Or would you say it's nowhere, woo-woo stuff? So general, and you don't have to raise your hand, but if you are a religion is everywhere, I see religion everywhere, or if you're a religion is a nowhere person, could we see the religions everywhere? And then the religion is nowhere? And then how about that religion is the answer to our woes? Anyone feeling like religion's the answer to our woes? Anyone feeling like religion is the problem driving the violence? Right? Now, so we got some experience out there. You guys know it when you see it. So here's the lay of the land with popular understandings of religion as I see it. That in general, people will have a sense for themselves if I'm religious or I'm spiritual, not religious. And that basically means I really don't want the institutional stuff, but I've got a meaningful life going. And then the folks who are like, no, not religious, you know, plant me with the tulips and I will become a molecule and that's just fine. And so if that's part of the lay of the land, and I'm the scholar of religion, and we got folks who know that they're religious, we got folks who know that they're spiritual, and folks who know that they're not religious, I want to suggest a different way. Largely that definition is going to be based on your thinking about whether or not you're someone who has beliefs and or beliefs in a God. And I want to give you a different way of thinking about religion. That's hard to do because it's something folks are so familiar with. And any of you educators know that the greatest strength you have as an educator in a room is the experience people bring with them, and it can be the greatest weakness because it's hard to think something differently. So I hope I'm going to give you a different way of thinking today. All right, so what in the world is a locative theory of religion? The idea that religion locates you, and that I could look at Buddhism and I could see the ways that the religion locates the people with regard to what is of greatest importance to them. And then I could go look at Catholicism, and I could still see what is the ways that this tradition provides people with a sense of what is of ultimate significance to me, and what is my place in a cosmos. So a locative theory of religion. So this definition is from Charles H. Long, and he writes, looked at comparatively, religions help people establish the ultimate significance of their place in the world. And do you see that, their place in the world? That's the locative part of it. I know where I stand, right? So this also gives you a sense of the involvement of the person, right? That this is a matter of meaning, and this is a matter of navigation and negotiation, and it might change over time. But that religions help people establish the ultimate significance of their place in the world. Now, I know if I'm lost on a street corner, right, that's one way of being located or dislocated in the world. But do I really know where I stand with that which is most important? And that would be the work of religion. Now, the great thing about this approach is that you get some nice, easy questions out of it, much like a journalist does. And so questions like how, where, when, and who. How does religion provide a person with an orientation to the ultimate significance of their place in the world? And space and time. That's funny, here we are back at space and time. Space and time is one of the ways religious traditions do this. So, for instance, a cosmic story will give people 3 positions in time. Where did we come from? That's the first spot. What's my next step? There's going to be your morals, your ethics, the purposiveness that the tradition provides. And finally, what is the meaning of my death for my community? That's where we see funerals, memorials, those kinds of rituals happening across different traditions. So what every orienteer knows is you need 3 positions in space to figure out where you stand. Geometrists, what are they called? You've got optometrists and people who do geometry. I'm talking about people who do geometry, right? 3, there we go, geometers, thank you. It takes 3 points to know where something is located. So we've got past, present, and future. And so a story, a creation story, a cosmological story is giving you these 3 positions. And through the course of a life, one can figure out where you stand. So the cosmic story also generally gets repeated every year. So the birth or death of key figures, we've got the birth of the Buddha celebrated every year. Some of you might be familiar with Christmas. So, right, and so every year, not only do you have a story about this moment in time, but every year, then religious traditions embedded into an annual calendar. That's a pretty great way to keep yourself going. It's a pretty good way to equate your time with a meaningful time. It's not just December 25th. Let's remember what's most important. You hear that kind of talk when Christmas comes. And we could do that for every tradition. The Buddha's birth, the Buddha's death, every year. So the where question, now this gal I just love. So she's published The Location of Religion. And I'm going to read to you what she says about her book. My intention is to look closely at contemporary everyday spaces in order to discern the location of religion within them. by considering its dynamic relations with the other features of those spaces: social, cultural, physical, political, economic spaces. So she wants to discern the place of religion in this situated world where sometimes you're walking into a courtroom and sometimes you're walking into a sacristy. She wants to look at its active and passive modes and its possibilities for dominance, resistance, and liberation. By so doing, I think we shall see that there are no data that are irrelevant for the study of religion, and that there are no places in which religion may not, in some sense or other, be found. And so I just wanted you to know that this kind of stuff is out there, because if you'd like a good read, this is pretty fun stuff. So it sounds like she's on the everywhere, like religion is everywhere. There's data to be found. So how do we know religious person when we see one? So if there's one useful thing I'm going to do today, it's to show you religious person. So you can say, I learned how to see religious person. Now I can find religious person. All right, so if we recall our definition, that for our purposes, religion is an orientation to the ultimate significance of one's place in the world, then have a look at this figure, and don't mistake the single person there. Because religious person is never alone. We are all born halfway through our story and begin our orientations with the stories our people tell us. Also, and we find this across all of the traditions, that gender differences matter. Now this is my best effort at an androgynous figure. And it's just way easier and nicer for me to make her female than male. So I just got some dangly part there, okay? But the point is, there's not a religious tradition that does not consider male and female to belong at the same time, where they differentiate male and female spheres of activity. So that's an interesting thing about religious person. Just know their gender matters. Life cycle, I've got 4 marks through the kind of horizon, cosmology overhead, for birth, puberty, marriage, and death, as those life cycle changes that are so great that communities ritualize them across the traditions. So that if you're going to change from being a pregnant woman to being a woman with a child, your community is going to gather and do something about that. That's one of those landmarks that the entire community is going to watch. And so your life cycle becomes one of the ways in a religious tradition that you mark time and transitions. You have a different set of responsibilities when you hit puberty. You got a different set of ethics once you're married. And then when you die, I don't care if you're an atheist, people are going to come around and remember you. We do this gathering thing. We mark these landmarks. And that the cliff of mortality, that's kind of tricky down there. I didn't do any flames or anything, right? Because in case there were Buddhists in the room. But that death presses in on human cultures. That question of dying and what the meaning of our death means. So you know religious person if you find an androgynous figure that is impacted by birth, puberty, marriage, death, and is trying to make sense of the ultimate significance of their place in the world. So a few more key points about them. That they are oriented toward that which is most powerful, right? If you've got a connection with the creator of the earth, that's a lot different than being able to call up Farmers Insurance. You're dealing with, so religious person, never doubt that religious person is always going to be entangled in relationships of power, because they are looking to tap into that which they understand to be is the most powerful thing in the world. Of course they're going to be involved in violence. Of course they're going to be involved in territorial issues. These are folks who are tapping into, understand themselves in a relationship to that which is most powerful. And it means that borders, and I threw border wars in there because CSU is playing this weekend, but it means that the borders of your horizon are the places of intensified significance, because if you're starting to get to the edge of where you belong, then it's starting to get potentially dangerous to you. That means my class can even feel dangerous to people, right? Because they're starting to get to the edge of the story that they always knew. And so now I'm asking them to think a different story. Now, if you're in a world religion, then your cosmos says that what we do is what everyone should do. My God is the God of the whole earth. And so if you're in a world religion, then your job is to pull in and send that message out for everyone and get everyone in the whole earth under your, and so we've got a name like Christendom, right? You got your kingdoms and then you got your Christendoms. It would mean that everyone should be under our arch because that's what God is. But indigenous religions don't pull people in. And they, so you don't have to worry about Grant Bulltail coming down to knock on your door in a tie with a nameplate to tell you about Akbahi Lashe. Because if you weren't born near Crow Agency and you weren't his grandfather's son, he reckons you probably aren't, that's not your story. So that's a whole different, the world religions have a sense of, this is the story everyone ought to hear. And the indigenous religions generally feel like, well, if your grandmother didn't give it to you, it's probably not your story. So that's a real interesting difference between religious person in a world, or in more, you might think of religious, indigenous person as more grounded on where their feet stand, whereas the world religion person is more grounded in that superstructure of an idea of theology. Now, the other thing about these circles that the religious person is found in is that if you are raised in a closed circle about who is right and who is chosen, then anyone outside of that circle is wrong. And we hear these days the word infidel. Right? The idea of somebody is an infidel. And one way to understand what happens if you have a closed circle about what is right and what is wrong is that can become the altar where difference means I can sacrifice you because you're wrong. And so when we understand, I'm just one of those kind of trauma junkies. I want to understand religion at its places where even violence is happening. Like, what is this about? And that idea that the outside, I now have an altar that I will sacrifice you on because everything that's right and good belongs inside this. And those are very different kinds of theologies. There are also people who live in a very strong tradition, but they know my job is to go across and find the other. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to be like the Samaritan. I don't care if you're not a Samaritan. I'm going to go reach across that. And I'll let you be whatever you are, but my job is to go across. So that's quite interesting. It's one of the ambivalences of religious traditions, that sometimes they seem to inspire just selflessness and even sacrifice for people not even their own, compared to ways that religion seems to justify the killing of people who are not your own. And that's, I mean, it's ambivalent stuff, right? It's hard to get a handle on that. All right. So let's go try and do some crow stuff. And Paul, can you give me an assessment of where I am with my time?
15 minutes easy, 20 minutes?
Yes! We're going to do this. All right, Crow Agency to voodoo. Here we go. All right, so Grant Bulltail, I've been working with him for about 10 years. He was a U.S. Marine in 62 to 66. He got his Bachelor of Science from Montana in 74. He did folklore studies with Dr. Fife at Utah State in Logan, and we are building quite a record of his stories there, thanks to that kind of heritage he has there. He was a cowboy, and one of his great memories is as a young man, he could get on a horse over near Pryor, Montana, and ride all the way to Cody. Can any of you imagine this? I mean, we might be the big open empty space, but can you imagine thinking to yourself, I'll just ride 120 miles? Right? Like, what's it mean to cross a fence now? So he knew that kind of movement as a young man. And here's where he gets his stories from. So this is his great-great-grandfather, and it's wonderful when you're working with a guy like Grant because everybody's either your grandfather or your aunt, right? And so this is his great-grandfather, but he just calls him grandfather, and that's why it can be hard doing oral work, is that you got to catch what's going on. So he comes up red, lived from 1847 to 1947. So let's just think about what happened in that century for that man, right? So he was born a Buffalo Indian, right? He was still part of the Buffalo economy. And he was born right near me. So he was born near White Tip Bear Mountain, although we call it Carter Mountain. So our kind of symbolic map of what you call things and how you locate yourself is built largely on the names of settlers who came in. But for him, that same mountain is White Bear Mountain. So we locate ourselves differently. And so this is a picture of Grant Bulltail in his great-grandfather's arms near the Little Bighorn River. And Grant was recognized early on as one of those people with those amazing memories. And so his great-grandfather brought him through Yellowstone, brought him through the Sunlight Basin. They call that the Rotten Sundance Valley. And he told him the stories. Because in an oral tradition, you're always looking for who's the kid with the memory? Who's the one I can tell the stories to? And so Grant was recognized early on, and you'd be, God, it's so fun to be around a memory like that. Maybe some of you have someone in your family who's the memory person. So in order to understand, I'm going to go back here and let you have this. So one of the stories that Grant learned was the story of creation, and it's a great tragedy with a resolution. And I'm going to call this creation story the first separation. So picture the following symbolic map of how the creation started and the rupture that happens according to Crow stories that separates people from the power of the Creator's gifts. All right, so the creation begins with duck and wolf. And duck and wolf help the Creator. And it could take about an hour to tell that story. It's a great story. But so when humans get created, the Creator sees how helpless they are. I mean, we've got rotten hide. We don't run like antelopes. We like our teeth. You're going to take on a mountain lion with these? Right? We're pretty pathetic. So he gave humans 3 gifts each. For women, they got the fire, the teepee, and the ability to make babies. And for men, they got strength and weapons and the gift of tears. And the men looked at him like, men don't cry. We don't want your gift of tears. What do you mean you're giving us the gift of tears? And this made the Creator very angry. And he said, well, tears are where the power of the creation comes. That's where my greatest energy is. So if you don't want them, you don't get them. But after a while, people were doing so poorly, the Creator urged the Apsalica, and Apsalica is the name the Crow have for themselves. So the Creator relented after a while, and he urged the Apsalica to seek the tears of his creation so that they may not be helpless in their lives. And this is Grant's words. This practice is wrongfully called vision quest. The Apsalica call it to seek for tears. The few that are rewarded with the gift of tears are called Baishta Gushte, eyes that have been opened to the supernatural. So the sense of the gift of tears and their stories about people who receive the gift of tears is that then they realize this bird, this feather, that mountain, that's where the water is. So they have an access to the supernatural power at work in the world. So we can bring a locative theory to the study of Crow orientations, their relationship to sacred places where their ancestors received the gift of supernatural powers. And the notion of what we're getting to here, going to get to, is how sacred land works, because sacred spots are the spots where people receive the gift of power for them. All right, so we've gone through the first separation. People were doing great, God was giving them gifts, and then they refused the gift. Tragically, wouldn't you know the guys rejected the tears? Anyway, in the end, we've got the resolution. If you will work hard and get yourself to the most remote places, then I will give you the gift of tears. So you have to show how hardworking you are. You have to give a little now. So this is one of the mountains where such gifts had been received. So this is Heart Mountain, just north of Cody, Wyoming. And their ancestor Foretop received the gift of tears from this mountain. And so their name for the mountain is Foretop's father, because they understood that mountains have agency. Mountains can be like a dad. This mountain adopted a person, which is a different sense of mountains than a lot of us might have. So if you have a locative theory of religion, you realize, oh my goodness, mountains do things in that map, in that symbolic map. All right, so, but we've got a problem because Grant is separated from this mountain. So this is a mountain near me. So let's understand this second separation. Why is Grant separated from the mountain? On this map from the Lohendorf and Nabokov book, you can see all of the regional Plains Indians tribes around the Yellowstone Plateau. So we got, you guys can locate there and you can see there's probably 14 of those tribes who have stories about Heart Mountain. It has a very distinctive place and people remember it and they tell stories about it. And then as we get closer, this is Crow territory, about 1851. Does that look familiar to any of you as the Crow Reservation now? I wonder if I could find Cody. Looks like Cody's part of Crow territory. Looks like Billings is Crow territory. Looks like Thermopolis, and yeah. So in 1851, this is how at Fort Laramie they determined Crow territory at about 33 million acres. And this map shows you what I'm calling the second separation. That central polka dot piece of it, that smallest piece of it, is what is now the Crow Reservation. And when Wyoming drew its state line, isn't it different how our states are those straight lines, right? Compared to that previous territory that traveled rivers, and it was about watersheds and mountain ranges. And so, but when Wyoming draws their straight line across there, they manage to get rid of the Crow and turn them into Montana Indians. There's very few people in Cody, Wyoming who think of Crow as Indians who, for 500 years, were moving the territory. But that's how great a line is. It can do that for you. Just get rid of 500 years of history. All right, so we've watched how a second separation happened. And so since Grant lives up at Crow Agency in Montana, and I live down in Cody, we've paired up for a way to help reopen circulation. I got 10 minutes left. So we're going to fly through this, and I'm just barely going to introduce VODOUN. And Grant says that the Apsalika were thoroughly overwhelmed by Akbahi Lashe, a conviction of a force that does the overcoming. So Akbahi Lashe is the ultimate source of energy for his community, whose powers are limitless. The quality of ultimate source caused the Apsalika to acknowledge that this entity has final authority over them. Think about that overarching, right? Akbahi Lashe has final authority over them. And therefore, the convictions with which they deal with nature and the universe are valid and binding, permanent and sacred, which is really a theory of politics, economy, and religion, all wrapped up into one. Akbahi Lashe overarches us. The convictions with which we deal with nature and the universe are valid, like a good contract, and binding, permanent and sacred. So they've got themselves positioned on a landscape. And they've got an overarching authority, and they orient according to its power and look for those places where they have most access to that power, the sacred lands. And part of what Grant says is that the Crow people were living so close to nature that their faith was in an ultimate source of energy. I've said that poorly. Let me just slow down. He takes that the Crow relationship to nature gave them logical inference every day. Where did you find water? What did you do with water? What does water do? That their relationship to power comes from nature. So if you want to tap into Akbahi Lashe, you tap into nature. And ultimately, the faith in an ultimate source of energy arouses a sense of order and the emotion of the Crow people. So that gives you a sense of a community oriented. The true nature of all life is energetic and fluid. All the forces that ever existed resulted from the convergence of all the truths in nature, including man. Nature is the most abstract truth as well as the most practical. That should be a t-shirt. Nature is the most abstract truth as well as the most practical. The workings of nature from season to season are its own evidence. That's how they navigate on the world. The divine beauty in nature and the love of man to nature is that which is found in combination with the human will and never separate. So now if you think of a religious person, realize that he's implying human will is an essential element of a relationship to Akbahi Lashe. We are taught by this will that nature is affiliated to every individual ever born. And this means that for his theology, his cosmology, every person in this room, every person ever, is affiliated to nature. Now, voodoo. I've got 2 minutes? Yep. So this work is from Alana Jefferson Tatum, who got her master's in theology from Harvard and then her PhD. And I wanted to do this because you see the same thing happening as was happening with the Grant Bulltail maps, right? So in the far left one, you're seeing the larger kingdoms. In the near map, you're seeing the Yu, the Fan, the Tem, the Batu, the Nupe, the Igala, right? So the sense of tribes that move with rivers and mountains, and that's where the lines come. Don't worry, we get the lines. The lines come in. In this 1729 map, we see the line starting. So the Portuguese start. The French have it for 100 years. It's currently a republic. French is the official language. It's a little bit like speaking English in Cody. French is the official language. And in terms of the religions there, Roman Catholic is the biggest, then Islam, then Voodoo, then Protestantism. And what I'm going to do is give you a few pictures, because I got to wrap up, but there's some good stuff here about a relationship to nature and her ultimate argument. And so if anybody wants to talk, whoops, there we go. And I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
We have 3 or 4 minutes for questions if anybody would like to direct a question.
How do you manage your own life in Cody with relationship to UW?
It's a really great question, isn't it? I'm inventing a career up there. What?
Repeat the question.
Oh, yes. How do I navigate being in Cody and having a career at UW? And I would say that I was a reluctant adopter to the online environment, but that the capacity to teach courses online has taught me everything that Harmony.com knew. That when you are talking with your words, some remarkable work happens. Some of my best class discussions have happened online, and in part it's because the quiet people are pretty happy typing. I'm one of those gregarious ones who had something to say to everything. And when you start realizing, oh my gosh, there's a lot of smart people in the room who don't have to talk in the online class. So anyway, the teaching is meaningful to me, and then I scrounge for whatever research I can do. So I wouldn't recommend it as a career path, but I would for the kind of meaning I've had with.
And as your students are all over, or?
My classes run worldwide, which means 99% of the students are in Wyoming. And somebody who was in the Air Force is now in Uzbekistan, and they're taking the class. But no, I've got California students, I've got, so yes, there are, but largely they are all matriculated UW. Yeah.
You've mentioned that the indigenous religions don't pull others into their religion. Do they also close the circle and not want to bring? I mean, do they keep others out?
That really depends. You've all seen the joke about the Indians standing at Plymouth Rock saying, you think they're going to stay? So it really depends, tribe by tribe, what that sense of interiorness is. But whenever you put groups of people together, men will find women across lines, and babies happen. Yeah. So on the one hand, that's one answer to the question, is that marrying in and acts of great bravery, it might be somebody you tried to kill and you didn't kill them, and in the end you're best friends. I mean, so there's variety on that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we got one.
One more
I
quick.
just wanted to ask, when you said indigenous, does that include indigenous people in other continents, say the Aborigine? Is that kind of universal?
Yes. Yes, and that the term indigenous religion, there's plenty of people who don't want to be called religion, right? Because they saw what happened when religion came over and they didn't want any of that, thank you. But if we use a locative theory, and if you ask them about meaning making and say you're interested in that, they're likely to, yes. But yes, so indigenous religions, and I do have a chapter on it. How do you think about, like if you got somebody dealing with polar bears and somebody else dealing with little frogs with poison on them, like would you find something common there? And so what can we say about indigenous religions is a great question. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.